Okay. Chapter 14. The Memoirs of Casanova. Who can explain the power which certain words exercise on the mind? The previous day, I had boasted of my courage, supported by my innocence. Yet the word tribunal petrified me and left me only the faculty of passive obedience. My writing desk was open and all my papers were spread out on a table. Take them, I said to the emissary of the horrible tribunal, pointing to the papers. He filled a sack with them, handed it to a sbirro, and told me that I must also give him all the bound manuscripts I had in my possession. This opened my eyes. I saw clearly that I had been betrayed by the infamous Manuzzi, who, as I have already said, came to see me on the pretext of selling those books. While Messer Grand was gathering my manuscripts, books, and letters, I dressed myself mechanically, neither quickly nor slowly. I washed, shaved, combed my hair, and put on my finest clothes, without thinking about what I was doing or saying a word. When I went out, I was surprised to find about 40 sbirri in the antechamber. I had been honored by the assumption that they were necessary for my arrest. Messer Grand led me to a gondola in which he sat down beside me with an escort of 4 men. After a number of detours along small canals, we entered the Grand Canal and stopped at the prison known as the Leads. Messer Grand turned me over to the jailer who, followed by 2 sbirri, led me up 2 flights of stairs, at the top of which we walked along a gallery. Then another one separated by a locked door, and finally a third gallery, at the end of which he unlocked a door leading into a dirty attic. I took this attic for my cell, but I was mistaken. Taking an enormous key, the jailer unlocked a massive iron-clad door, 3.5 feet high, with an 8-inch round hole in the center. He ordered me to enter. I had to bend double to do so. He locked me in and then asked me through the grilled hole in the door what I wanted to eat. I haven't thought about it yet, I replied. He left, carefully locking all the doors behind him. Overwhelmed and stunned, I placed my elbows on the ledge of the window. It was 2 feet square and crossed by 6 iron bars, an inch thick, forming 16 5-inch square holes. This opening would have made my cell rather light if the rays of the sun coming through the attic window had not been intercepted by a rectangular beam 10 inches wide. I walked around my cell with my head bowed, for the ceiling was only 5.5 feet high, and found that it formed 3/4 of a square 12 feet on each side. The 4th quarter was a kind of alcove, large enough to contain a bed, but I found no bed or furniture of any kind, except for a bucket, whose use the reader will be able to guess, and a blank a foot wide, fastened to the wall 4 feet from the floor. It was there that I placed my taffeta coat and my laced, trimmed hat decorated with a beautiful white feather. It was extremely hot, and instinct pushed me automatically to the little window. I could not see the attic window, but I could see into the attic, where frighteningly large rats were running to and fro. The hideous animals came right up to my window without showing the slightest fear. I hastened to close the shutters which blocked the round hole in the middle of the door, for a visit from them would have chilled my blood. Then, with my arms on the window ledge, I sank into a dazed and motionless silence which lasted for 8 hours. When I finally became aware of my surroundings again, I began to be worried by the fact that no one had yet come to bring me food and something on which I could sleep. I was not hungry, but never in my life has my mouth been so dry. Towards sundown, I became furious. I cursed, pounded, kicked, and shouted. But after an hour of this exercise, I still saw no one appear, and I had no way of knowing whether or not my cries had been heard. I lay down on the plank. Such cruel abandon did not seem natural to me, and I decided that the barbarous inquisitors had sentenced me to death. I scrupulously examined all my actions without finding anything which might have made me deserve such treatment. I was a libertine, a gambler, a bold speaker, and I usually thought of nothing except how to enjoy life. But I could not see a crime against the state in any of this. I was nevertheless being treated as a criminal. My rage and despair moved me to fulminate against the horrible despotism that was oppressing me in terms which I prefer to let the reader imagine, for propriety forbids me to write them down. However, the tumult of my mind, the hunger I was beginning to feel, the thirst that was devouring me, and the hardness of the plank on which I was lying did not prevent my exhausted body from claiming its rights. I went to sleep. I was awakened by the sound of a clock striking midnight. How horrible is an awakening when it makes one wish for oblivion again. How horrible is an awakening when it makes one wish for oblivion again. Lying on my left side, I put out my right arm to pick up the handkerchief I remembered placing beside me before I went to sleep. I groped. Imagine my shock when my hand seized another hand that was as cold as ice. Fear electrified me from head to toe, and my head stood on end. Never in my life have I been gripped by such terror. I spent 3 or 4 minutes in a kind of daze, not only immobilized, but incapable of even thinking. When I had recovered my senses, I tried to tell myself that the hand was only a figment of my troubled imagination. In this hope, I reached out again, but found the same hand. Shuddering with horror, I uttered a piercing cry and drew back my arm. Soon, when I had become a little calmer and believed myself capable of reflection, I decided that a corpse had been placed beside me while I was asleep. I was sure it had not been there when I lay down. must be the body of some poor prisoner who's been executed, I thought. And they must have put it there to let me know the fate that's awaiting me. This thought enraged me, and all my fear gave way to anger. I reached out for the third time and seized a hand with the intention of verifying the full atrocity of the deed. But when I raised myself up on my left elbow, I realized that I was holding my own left hand. Numbed by the weight of my body and the hardness of the plank on which I was lying, it had lost all its warmth, movement, and feeling. This incident, despite its comic aspects, did not cheer me up. On the contrary, it led me to make the gloomiest of reflections. I realized that I was in a place where if the false appear true, then the true must appear false, where a man's intelligence must lose half its privileges, and where fantasy must make his reason the victim of either illusory hopes or horrible despair. I resolved to be on my guard against these things, and for the first time in my life, at the age of 30, I called on philosophy to help me. I had all the germs of it in my soul, but I had never felt the need of it before. I believe that most men die without ever having thought, and that this is not so much from lack of intelligence as because the shock necessary for the development of the faculty of thinking has never been produced by an extraordinary event in opposition to their everyday habits. I believe that most men die without ever having thought, and that this is not so much from lack of intelligence as because the shock necessary for the development of the faculty of thinking has never been produced by an extraordinary event in opposition to their everyday habits. Towards sunrise, the profound silence was broken by the sound of doors being unlocked in the corridors through which it was necessary to pass in order to reach me. Have you had time to decide what to eat? Shouted the jailer through the grill. I replied that I wanted some rice soup, boiled and roasted meat, bread, wine, and water. I saw that the lout was astonished not to hear the complaints he was expecting. He went away and came back a quarter of an hour later to tell me he was surprised I did not want a bed and some furniture. If you think you've been put here to spend one night, he added, you are mistaken. In that case, bring me everything you think I'll need. Where shall I go? Here's a pencil and a piece of paper. Write it all down. I wrote down where he was to go to bring me clothes of all kinds, a bed, a table, a chair, the books Messer Grand had taken from me, paper, pens, etc. When I read him the list, he could not read. He said, cross out the books, pens, paper, mirror, and razors, because all of those things are forbidden. All of those things are forbidden here. Then give me some money to buy your dinner. I had 3 sequins. I gave him one and he left. He spent an hour in the corridors, occupied, as I later learned, in serving the 7 other prisoners who were kept in cells widely separated from one another in order to prevent all communication. He reappeared toward noon, followed by 5 Sabri, who were assigned to serve the prisoners of the state. He unlocked my cell to give me my dinner and the furniture I had ordered. The bed was placed in the alcove, and my dinner was put on a small table, along with an ivory spoon which the jailer had brought with my money. Forks, knives, and all cutting instruments were forbidden. Tell me what you want for dinner tomorrow, said the jailer. Because I can come only once a day, at sunrise. The secretary has ordered me to tell you he'll send some suitable books to you, but the ones you asked for are forbidden. Thank him for his kindness in putting me in a cell alone. I'll do what you ask, but you're wrong to joke that way. I'm not joking. I'd rather be alone than with the scoundrels who must be here. What? Scoundrels? The prisoners here are all honorable men, although they must be separated from society for reasons known only to their excellencies. You were put in a cell alone to add to your punishment, and you want me to give them your thanks for it? I didn't know that. The ignorant jailer was right. The ignorant jailer was right. The ignorant jailer was right. And it did not take me long to find it out. I realized that a man locked up alone has no way of occupying himself, that alone in a dark place where he sees no one but the man who brings him food once a day, and where he cannot walk without bowing his head, he is the most wretched of all creatures. He wishes for hell, if he believes in it, in order to have company. This feeling is so impervious that I would have been glad to have the company of a murderer, of a man with a loathsome disease, or even of a bear. Solitude behind bars fills a man with utter despair. But in order to believe this, it is perhaps necessary to know it from experience. And that experience is one which I would not wish even my enemies to undergo. If a man of letters in this situation receives pen and paper, his happiness diminishes by 90%. But my persecutors had no thought of granting me such palliatives. 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 When my jailer was gone, I sat down to eat, but I was able to swallow only a few spoonfuls of soup. I had eaten nothing but 48 hours. I had eaten nothing for 48 hours. So it was not surprising that I was ill. I did not close my eyes all night long, kept awake by the horrible uproar made by the rats and the deafening sound of the clock of San Marco, which sounded as though it were in my cell with me. This double torment was not the greatest one I had to bear, and I doubt that many of my readers will have a true idea of the one to which I am referring. The thousands of fleas which vigorously attacked me from head to toe, sucking my blood with incredible determination and avidity. Their incessant bites gave me convulsions and poisoned all my blood. At dawn, Lorenzo, my jailer, came in, had my bed made and my cell swept out, and one of his Sbirri gave me some water with which to wash myself. I wanted to go out into the attic, but Lorenzo told me it was not allowed. He gave me 2 large books and walked away, leaving my food on the table. I hastened to eat my soup while it was still hot. Then I took one of the books over to the window, where I saw with pleasure that I would have enough light to read. I looked at the title and saw The Mystic City of Sister Maria de Jesus, known as Sister de Agrada. The second book was by a young Jesuit named Caravita. This sanctimonious hypocrite had established a new worship of the Sacred Heart of our Lord Jesus Christ. Of all the human parts of our divine mediator, it was the heart, according to the author, which we ought to worship particularly. This was the singular idea of an ignorant fool, and his book revolted me from the first page onward, because I could not see why the heart was a more respectable organ than the lungs, the stomach, or any other. The mystic city interested me a little. In it, I read everything that can be engendered by the extravagant imagination of a pious, melancholic, and cloistered Spanish virgin whose confessors are ignorant, hypocritical, and sanctimonious. All her fantastic and monstrous visions were decorated with the name of revelations. All her fantastic and monstrous visions were decorated with the name of revelations. An intimate and devoted friend of the Holy Virgin, she had been ordered by God Himself to write the life of His Divine Mother. The necessary instructions had been given to her by the Holy Ghost. She begins the life of Mary, not on the day of her birth, but on that of her Immaculate Conception. After relating in detail everything her divine heroine did during the 9 months she spent in her mother's womb, she informs us that at the age of 3, she swept the house, aided by 900 servants, all of whom were angels sent to her by God and commanded by their own Prince Michael, who traveled back and forth between her and God to transmit their reciprocal correspondence. The most striking thing about this book is that the reader feels sure the author does not believe she has invented anything. Everything is stated in good faith and with full conviction. The need to occupy myself with something made me spend a week on this masterpiece of foolishness. And I began to feel obsessed. As soon as I succumbed to sleep, I was aware of the dis-ease which Sister de Agrada had communicated to my mind, which had been weakened by melancholy, bad food, lack of movement, and my horrible uncertainty about the fate that had been reserved for me. My extravagant dreams made me laugh when I remembered them after awakening. I would have written them down if I had had pen and paper, and perhaps I would have produced a book even more insane than the one which had been so ingeniously chosen for me. I saw that, although men rarely go mad, the thing is always possible. Our reason is like gunpowder, which, while highly inflammable, is never ignited without the contact of a spark. Sister de Agrada's book. Sister de Agrada's book has all the properties necessary to unhinge a man's mind. But in order for the poison to take effect, he must be isolated, placed in the leads, and deprived of any other occupation. After the first 9 or 10 days, I found myself without money. When Lorenzo asked me for some, I replied, I have no more. Where shall I go to get some? Nowhere. My silence and laconism were my most unpleasant qualities in the eyes of my ignorant, greedy, loquacious, and curious jailer. Laconism. My silence and laconism were my most unpleasant qualities in the eyes of my ignorant, greedy, loquacious, and curious jailer. The next day he told me that the tribunal had assigned me 50 soldi per day, SOLDI. The money was to remain in his hands, but he would give me an account of it at the end of each month. This was more than I needed. At the end of the first month, there was an excess of 30 lire, Lire, which I was not allowed to put into my pocket. I gave it to Lorenzo and told him to use it to have masses said for me, convinced that he would use it for completely different purposes. The tone of satisfaction in which he thanked me proved to me that he himself would be the priest. I did the same thing every month, and I never saw a receipt from any priest. Lorenzo did well to carry out the ceremony in a cabaret. The money was at least useful to someone. I lived from day to day, persuading myself each night that I would be set free the following day. Disappointed each day, I decided in my poor head that my liberation would certainly come on the 1st of October, the day on which the reign of the new inquisitors began. I imagined that the present inquisitors must have recognized my innocence and that they were keeping me in prison only in order not to stain their reputation with injustice. From this, I concluded that they would set me free when they lay down the scepter of their exorbitant power. The scepter of their exorbitant power. My rights appeared incontestable, and I reasoned accordingly. But reason has nothing to do with the tribunal, which distinguishes itself from all others by the arbitrariness and arrogance of its actions. The fact that the state inquisitors have imprisoned someone establishes his guilt, and then what need is there to speak to him? On September 30th, I lay awake all night, consumed with impatience to see the new day appear, for I was sure it would bring me my freedom. The reign of the scoundrels who had deprived me of it expired on that day, but at dawn Lorenzo appeared as usual and did not announce anything new to me. For 5 or 6 days I was overwhelmed with rage and despair, and then I decided that, for reasons impossible to guess, I had been sentenced to remain in prison for the rest of my life. It was then that I knew I would either escape or be killed in the attempt. In order for the reader to understand my escape, it will be necessary for me to describe its setting. The leads consist of a group of cells reserved for prisoners of state and are nothing but the attic of the Ducal Palace. Ducal Palace. The name of the prison comes from the wide sheets of lead with which the roof of this palace are covered. In order to reach the cells, one must pass through the hall in which the state inquisitors hold their meetings. No one but the secretary has a key, which he entrusts to the jailer only for the time, only for the short time necessary to serve the prisoners early in the morning. The cells are placed on each side of the roof. 3 on the west side, mine was included in this number, and 4 on the east. The rain gutter on the west side of the roof empties into the courtyard of the palace. The other one drops perpendicularly into the canal known as the Rio de Palazzo. My cell was directly above the Inquisitor's assembly room. They usually meet there only at night after the daily session of the Council of 10, of which all 3 inquisitors are members. Being well acquainted with the palace and the uniform habits of the inquisitors, I judged that my only chance of making a successful escape would be to make a hole in the floor of my cell. But I would have to have tools, and they would be difficult to obtain in a place where all communication with the outside world was forbidden. Bribing a guard would have taken a great deal of money, and I had none. In spite of all the obstacles, however, I thought of nothing except my escape. Convinced that I would find a way only by constantly trying to find one, I did not allow myself the slightest thought that was not related to my escape. I have always believed that if a man takes it into his head to accomplish something and concerns himself exclusively with the pursuit of his plans, he must succeed in spite of all the difficulties. Toward the middle of November, Lorenzo told me I could take a walk in the attic for half an hour each day. I found this promenade excellent for my health and my plans for escape. At the end of that rat's den, I saw, scattered on the floor, some old furniture, a warm pan, a metal pot, a coal shovel, a pair of tongs, some old candlesticks, some earthenware pots, and even a syringe. I judged that some illustrious prisoner had once been distinguished by permission to use these objects. But the thing that interested me most was a bolt as thick as my thumb and a foot and a half long. I touched nothing, however, for my plans had not ripened sufficiently to allow me to fix my choice. On New Year's Day, 1756, I received some presents. Lorenzo brought me a fur-lined dressing gown, a silk quilt, and a bearskin bag in which to put my legs. I was delighted to have these things, for the cold had become as difficult to bear as the heat had been in August. Lorenzo also told me on behalf of the secretary of the tribunal that I would be given 6 sequins a month, that I could buy whatever books I wanted, and that this present came to me from Signor Bragadino. I asked him for a pencil and wrote the following on a piece of paper. I am grateful for the generosity of the tribunal and the virtue of Signor Bragadino. It is necessary to have been in a situation similar to mine in order to realize what this change meant to me. In my first surge of emotion, I forgave my oppressors and was on the point of abandoning my plans for escape, which shows how pliable a man can become when he is crushed and debased by misfortune. Lorenzo told me that Signor Bragadino had gone to the 3 inquisitors, knelt before them, and begged them with tears in his eyes to allow him to send me a token of his constant love if I was still among the living. The inquisitors were so deeply moved that they could not refuse him. I immediately wrote down the titles of the books I wanted. On the morning, as I was taking my walk in the attic, I looked at the bolt, which I have already mentioned, and realized that it could become a good offense and defensive weapon. I picked it up, hid it under my dressing gown, and took it into my cell. After rubbing it against the stone for a time, I found that I had obtained a well-made facet. I spent a week making 8 triangular facets, whose extremities formed a perfect point. It is difficult to imagine the pain and fatigue I had to endure to accomplish this. My right arm became so stiff that I could hardly move it. The palm of my hand was lacerated by the numerous blisters caused by the length and intensity of my efforts. Proud of my pointed bolt, although I had not yet thought of how I could use it, my first concern was to hide it in such a way that even a thorough search of my cell could not discover it. After rejecting countless ideas as unsafe, I finally managed to hide it in my armchair so well that no suspicion could be aroused. It was thus that Providence helped me prepare for an escape which was to be admirable, if not prodigious. I admit that I am proud of it, but my pride does not come from its success, for good luck played a large part in that. Rather, I am proud that I judged the thing possible, and that I had the courage to undertake it in the face of all the difficulties, knowing that if I failed, I would make my situation infinitely worse. After reflecting for 3 or 4 days on what use to make of my bolt, now transformed into a pike, I decided that the simplest thing would be to make a hole in the floor under my bed. I was certain that the assembly room was directly below me, and I knew that it was unlocked every morning. I could easily lower myself into it by making a rope out of my sheets and tying it to the foot of my bed. I would hide under the great table of the tribunal until morning, and then, as soon as the door was unlocked, I would run outside and reach a safe place before there was time to follow me. It occurred to me that a guard might be stationed in the assembly room during the night, but my pike would quickly get rid of him. The floor might be composed of 2 or even 3 lays. This presented a great problem. For how could I prevent the guard from sweeping out my cell during the 2 months I might require for my work? I forbade them to do so. Or if I forbade them to do so, it would arouse suspicion, especially since, in order to deliver myself from the fleas, I had demanded that they sweep every day. The broom would certainly have revealed my work. I had to find a way to eliminate that difficulty. I began by forbidding the guards to sweep the floor of my cell. When Lorenzo asked me the reason, I told him the dust made me cough violently and might cause me to contract some serious illness. I'll have the floor sprinkled with water, he said. That would be worse because the dampness might bring on plethora. This gave me a week's respite. But at the end of that time, Lorenzo ordered that my cell be swept out. He had my bed taken out into the attic, and on the pretext of sweeping more carefully, he lit a candle. This showed me that the scoundrel had become suspicious, but I put up an appearance of indifference. The next morning I pricked my finger, covered my handkerchief with blood, and waited for Lorenzo in my bed. As soon as he came in, I told him I had coughed so violently that I had broken blood vessel, which had caused me to cough up all the blood he saw. Send me a doctor, I said. The doctor came, bled me, and wrote out a prescription. I told him Lorenzo was the cause of my misfortune because he had insisted on sweeping out my cell. The doctor reproached him for this, told us about a young man who had just died for the same reason, and said that nothing was so dangerous as to inhale dust. Lorenzo swore that he had ordered my cell to be swept only as a favor to me, and promised that it would never happen again. I laughed to myself, for the doctor could not have done better if I had instructed him beforehand. When the doctor was gone, Lorenzo asked me to forgive him and assured me that the other prisoners were in good health, even though their cells were swept out rather regularly. But it's an important thing, he said, and I'm going to tell them about it because I regard them all as my children. I could now set to work. I pulled back my bed, lay down on the floor with a towel in which to place the splinters of wood, and began to gouge the floor with the point of my pike. At first, the pieces I detached were no larger than a grain of wheat, but they soon became larger. After 6 hours of work, I tied up the splinters in the towel. The next morning, I emptied it behind a stack of papers in the attic. By August 23rd, my work was completed. I had been delayed by an accident that was quite natural. When I had dug nearly all the way through the floor, I made a small hole through which I ought to be able to see into the assembly room below. I saw into it as I expected, but I also saw a perpendicular surface beside the hole. It was what I had always feared. One of the beams supporting the ceiling. This forced me to extend my opening in the opposite direction, for the beam would have made the passage so narrow that a man of my size would not have been able to get through. I therefore increased the width of the opening by a quarter, alternating between fear and hope, for it was possible that the space between the two beams might not be sufficient. A second small hole, however, allowed me to assure myself God, that God blessed my work. I carefully stopped up the two small holes in order to prevent anything from falling into the assembly room, which would have revealed my plan and brought on disaster. I set my escape for the night before St. Augustine's Day, because I knew that on that occasion there would be a meeting of the Grand Council, so that the room through which I would have to pass would be empty. This was to be on the 27th, but on the 25th I had a misfortune which still makes me shudder when I think of it, in spite of all the years that now separate me from it. At exactly noon, I heard the sound of doors being unlocked, and my heart began to pound so violently that I thought my last hour had struck. Frantic, I sank into my armchair and waited. Lorenzo put his face to the grill and called out cheerfully, "I've got good news for you." Thinking at first that I was about to be set free, for I could imagine no other good news, I shuddered, realizing that the discovery of my hole would cause my pardon to be revoked. Lorenzo entered my cell and told me to follow him. "Wait till I dress myself," I told him. "That doesn't matter because you're only going to go from this miserable cell into another one that's light and clean. You'll have two windows and you can see half of Venice from them. You'll be able to stand upright and—" I felt as though, I were going to faint. "Bring me some vinegar," I said. "And go tell the secretary I thank the tribunal for their kindness, but that I beg them to let me stay here." "Have you gone mad? They want to take you out of hell and put you into paradise, and you refuse. Come, you must obey. Get up. I'll have your clothes and books carried into your new cell." Seeing that resistance was useless, I stood up. I felt a great surge of relief when I heard Lorenzo order a guard to bring my armchair. My pike was going to follow me, and hope with it. I wished I could also take my beautiful hole with me. When I left that horrible place of pain, my whole soul remained behind. Supported by Lorenzo, who tried to cheer me up with his stupid jokes, I walked along two narrow corridors, down 3 steps, and into a large, well-lighted room, down another corridor, 2 feet wide and 12 feet long, at the end of which was my new cell. There was a grilled window opening onto 2 other grilled windows which filled the corridor with light, and from there I could enjoy a beautiful view as far as the Lido. I was in no mood for rejoicing at that sad moment, but I later saw with pleasure that the window let in a fresh, cool breeze, which tempered the unbearable heat. The reader will easily believe that all these observations came later. As soon as I had entered my new cell, Lorenzo had my armchair placed in it and went away, telling me he would have the rest of my possessions brought to me. I sat motionless in my chair, waiting for the storm to break, but without fearing it. The cause of my stupor was the crushing thought that all my scheming and painful effort had been wasted. I could not help considering my disaster as a punishment from God Himself for having failed to escape as soon as I had the means to do so. And yet, while it was true that I could have made my attempt 3 days earlier, I had delayed only for reasons of prudence, which seemed to me worthy of reward. In order to act against the reasons which made me postpone my escape until August 27th, I would have needed a kind of revelation. And reading Sister de Agrada's book had not made me insane enough for that.